and welcome to another one of my videos in which I am looking at obsessive compulsive disorder and the range of different subtypes from which obsessive compulsive disorder can present. So in previous videos, we've looked at harm OCD, we've looked at relationship OCD, we've looked at the normality of what it is to have intrusive thoughts in both clinical and non-clinical populations. So with that kind of background, really, I'm going to dip into one of the kind of perhaps a little bit more controversial, perhaps scarier types of OCD, which is something which we call POCD, also known more broadly as paedophile OCD. Now, because of the very nature of what paedophile OCD is, and because the content is, as it says, focusing on the fear of causing harm to minors, it's always appropriate, certainly at this stage in the video, to introduce exactly what we are talking about and compare it to what we are not talking about. So I'm aware that when other people on YouTube have attempted to make videos about POCD, it has stirred up a little bit of controversy, really about people not fully understanding exactly what it is we are talking about. So just broadly, obsessive compulsive disorder is where we overestimate the significance of having an intrusive thought to such a point where we believe that that thought says something negative and frightening about us. And basically, what I want to go through today in this video is talking a little bit about how those same kind of principles apply to POCD intrusive thoughts, and just kind of pave the way for a little bit of greater understanding about what it is that's actually going on, and actually show you that we can treat it using cognitive behavioural therapy with exposure and response prevention. So before we get into the particulars of POCD, I'm just going to show you the basic cognitive behavioral therapy model that I particularly use with my clients. Okay, so this is the model that I typically use for POCD and all of the other OCD subtypes. It's a cognitive model of OCD, which basically looks to change and modify the interpretation of what it means to have an intrusive thought. So just looking at this to begin with, the reason I am showing you this is because we will then apply this to a POCD framework, and again, just establishing what POCD is. Okay, so what we've got is we have a certain trigger, could be any kind of trigger, and that trigger will then lead to our intrusion. And in this model, our intrusion is understood to be either a thought, an image, an urge, or a doubt, and sometimes that could be a memory as well, or a little snippet of a memory. And then we've also got this bit here, which is the key thing in our OCD framework. Yeah. And this is what distinguishes POCD from the risk of somebody actually being a sexual predator in some way. Okay. What happens in OCD is that people will overestimate and become fearful about the fact that they've had this intrusive thought. Okay. So what that means is, in this context, having this thought means that I might act upon it or that I am in danger of it happening, etc. So different to a paraphilia, which is again some form of kind of sexual perversion or some form of again paedophilic risk, etc. In this context, what we are saying is that somebody will have an intrusive thought which then generates a threat response. Okay. And this is our target in OCD. We are looking at the meaning of what it means to have had this thought. And then that is the thing that then leads to a change in emotion. Okay. So we straight away, because we have a thought which we interpret as being a potential threat to us, a potential threat to other people, it activates a threat response, the emotional state of anxiety, from which we will then engage in a lot of what we call safety seeking behaviors. This could be, getting reassurance from other people that I am not the type of person to act on this thought. It could be checking ourselves at either an emotional or physical level for signs that, we are at risk of kind of feeling okay with these thoughts. We might also, again, start to engage in certain patterns of avoidance and certain thinking biases, which kind of get us caught up in misinterpreting what it means to have this particular thought. So that's the basic obsessive compulsive disorder model. Okay. Now, before I introduce the POCD model, I'm going to talk about two important distinctions, two important things here, which kind of are really relevant when we're talking about POCD and the other types of obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay. The first concept which I'm going to introduce is what we call ego dystonic. Okay, so ego dystonic basically means that the reason we are so anxious, threatened, disgusted by the nature of our intrusive thoughts is because they go against who we view ourselves as being as a person. Okay, so all our values, all the kind of positive things that kind of we value in ourselves, yeah, all of those kind of good qualities, they run counter to the nature of these intrusive thoughts. So when we have an intrusive thought, basically we then, because the thought goes against who we view ourselves as being as a person, we pay a lot more attention to it. We see it as a threat to our sense of self. Okay? And that's one of the things there that organizes the whole kind of, threat network and fear network. Okay. So this is absolutely the case when we're dealing with POCD. Yeah. The very fact that this person who has POCD then views that thought as being against who they are as a person, against their personal values, puts POCD and POCD intrusive thoughts in the realm of the OCD. Okay. This person isn't happy that they have had these thoughts. This person isn't at risk of acting on these thoughts. This person is reviled, disgusted, and incredibly fearful because they have had this thought. Yeah. And typically, examples of where POCD can show up for people, we know that in new parents, yeah. So a common place is where we've got young mothers perhaps who are spending time with their baby at home and they are presented with this, bundle of joy that they absolutely love and value more than anything else in the world. And OCD will just creep in and go in, but what if? Yeah. And OCD, because of the nature of it, because it kind of preys upon, our deepest fears, our real core fears, all of a sudden this new mother starts to kind of go into a battle with these particular types of thoughts. So they will start kind of organizing their reality around not having these thoughts. And the problem with that is that if we don't want to have a certain type of thought, we are telling our amygdala in our brain where the threat response comes from, we're telling our brain that that thought in and of itself is a threat. So then our brain will start to look for more instances of that threat. Okay. And then we got our usual trigger, changing a baby's nappy or whatever. Our minds will throw out more of those intrusive thoughts. Okay. So that's one illustration there of how, you know, OCD thoughts, POCD thoughts are ego dystonic, yeah, and get in the way of functioning. Okay. Entirely different to genuine paedophile thoughts. Okay? The other example I will use is discriminating between what we call desire and the fear of desire. Okay? So if you've ever struggled with an intrusive thought before, whether it is POCD, whether it is the type of thought, and it could be harm OCD or ROCD or whatever, okay? I just wanted to just test out this little exercise if you can. So just think a little bit about something that you really kind of crave. Okay. So an example I often use with people is to think about your favorite meal or your favorite snack or something like that. It could be cake, it could be chocolate. It could and kind of think a little bit about what it feels like at an emotional level to really look forward to that. To really kind of visualize kind of getting that particular food that you really enjoy and notice what that feels like. Yeah? So notice kind of how it feels at an emotional level, notice how your body responds to it, notice the kind of imagery that goes with it. And compare that to what you feel when you have an intrusive OCD thought. Okay? And notice when we have an intrusive OCD thought, we will probably have an increase in heart rate. We will probably have a kind of physical tension. We will probably have an aversion to that particular thought. Yeah. And comparing those two conditions, they're comparing the desire against fear of desire, we can actually see there again that what people experience in OCD isn't desire. Yeah. What people experience when they have an intrusive OCD thought is the exact opposite. Yeah. They then organize their reality around the fear of that thought saying something about them. Yeah. Saying that that thought actually is something that they want. Okay. So just understanding that discrimination, when people have POCD, it isn't desire, it is the fear of desire. Yeah. And it's that fear of desire that then activates more and more of these intrusive thoughts, starts to get people avoiding, starts to get people not living the life based upon their own personal values and the type of life that they really want. Okay. So those two little kind of factors there are really important when understanding POCD. Okay, so we've got the ego dystonic nature of these thoughts, which then leads to that threat response, and then we've got the fear of desire. Okay, so there are other factors there, other factors that play a part in POCD. So, with all that stuff in mind, I want to take you into what our cognitive behavioural model looks like and give you a little idea there about exactly what we need to do to enable people to overcome POCD. So, this model just shows us exactly the same as the generic OCD model, which I showed you before. In this model, we've just got some information, yeah, some more data there, which kind of shows how POCD presents, how the meaning we attach to POCD thoughts triggers a whole schema there of changes in behavior, changes in emotion, avoidance, and different patterns of thought that come up. Okay, so this isn't a real client, yeah, it's a composite of various kind of client presentations around POCD. And I just want to take you through the little steps there. And again, if you are struggling with POCD, or if you know somebody who is struggling with POCD, then absolutely just kind of compare perhaps how your presentation or their presentation relates to this model. Okay, so the example here we've got is somebody taking the grandchildren swimming. Okay, now this bit over here, the intrusive bit. So I always go to great pains to kind of stress to people that intrusive thoughts are commonplace across both clinical and non-clinical populations. Okay, so it's literally a feature of the mind to just throw out content all the time. Our mind is spitting out between 40,000 to 60,000 thoughts every single day, and we dismiss the vast majority of it. It doesn't even come into our conscious awareness, the huge amount of it. However, there are certain types of thoughts, again, which we perceive as being problematic for us. Okay, so in this instance, we've got this person as taking the grandchildren swimming, and their mind just spews out one of these 60,000 thoughts, and there's an image there of touching one of the children inappropriately. Now, rather than just dismiss it as just being an unpleasant thought that they don't want to have, but actually it's there, whatever, I'm just going to go swimming. In this instance, we then apply meaning to it. Okay, so this is what makes OCD OCD. This person goes, do you know what? This thought says something bad about me. Yeah. This thought, thinking it must mean there's something wrong. Yeah. Rather than dismissing it, rather than just getting on with the swimming, thinking this thought must mean I am a danger. Okay. And we've used some of the language there that people might use when they come to therapy. They have a fear there that they are a paedophile, their life is ruined, they're not going to be able to spend time with the family, their life's going to be over. They might even go so far as kind of images in the papers where, they're being locked up or they're sentenced, or they'll never be able to have the type of life that they truly want. Okay. Now, it's important to remember that actually, again, the meaning that people apply to the image is just another thought. Yeah. It's a thought, however, that is so powerful that it generates all of this threat, all of this tension for the person. And because they attribute so much meaning to this interpretation, it activates this stuff over here, which is our fear response, our threat response. Now, I've mentioned before there that actually our fear response, when activated, it's designed there to keep us safe. Okay? So in an appropriate environment, this threat system is everything you need. If somebody's coming at you with an axe or a bus is coming towards you, guaranteed you need this threat system. Okay. One of the difficulties with this threat system, however, is that it will kind of overestimate threat and look out for it, even though the threat isn't necessarily present. Okay, so if we go into a situation where we may have had an intrusive thought before, our mind is priming itself to look out for that thought again. Okay, it's treating our internal world, our thoughts, as though they are the same as a real threat. Okay, so we get this threat response. Okay, so our mind's looking for more of these thoughts, and because the thoughts exist internally, it's finding them. Yeah, it's looking out for a certain type of thought. Literally, don't have the bad thought, and our mind will say, "Do you mean this thought?" Okay, we've got ourselves into that loop. Okay, so we've got that emotional state of anxiety, disgust, even in terms of the contents of the thoughts. So what people then do, because they are overestimating the significance of the intrusion, what they then do is they will start engaging in patterns of avoidance. Okay. So rather than risk this thought being true, yeah, what people will then do is they might start engaging in avoidance, and in this case, stop taking the kids swimming, avoid the school run, little things like that. Okay. So straight away, OCD is chipping away at the functioning, normal functioning in this person's life. Okay, so because of the over significance applied to this particular thought, that's what this person does. Okay, and we've also got these kind of safety-seeking behaviours which people will engage in. They will engage in mental reassurance. Reassuring themselves that they're a good person, reassuring themselves that they love their grandchildren, etc. They would be checking for signs of physiological arousal. Okay, and that is problematic in the sense that your body is filtering out so much content all of the time. Right? It's not paying attention to the vast majority of sensory input all the time. If we pay attention to any particular area in the body at any one time, suddenly we become aware of sensations and activity that were there all of the time. Okay, so when we check for signs of internal physiological arousal or emotional arousal, we're just paying attention to stuff that was kind of already there. Okay. The problem again is that because of these thinking biases over here, we can misinterpret what it means to actually experience normal, physical sensations. Okay. Also, this last bit is where we will engage perhaps in the covert behavior of check and memory. Yeah. Did I do something wrong? Did I like that? Was I happy with that? Did I behave okay? One of the problems with check and memory is that it always becomes the go-to. Yeah, it becomes something there that basically the job is never finished. Yeah, there's always a little bit more memory we can revisit. There's always, gaps in memory, etc. And OCD will latch onto those gaps. But what about that bit? Can you remember that bit well enough? Yeah, but do you remember this correctly? It becomes the go-to. Yeah. So OCD takes over our lives. It fills things up there. We're avoiding things. We're spending all our time in our heads checking. We're kind of reassuring ourselves, etc. Okay. Okay. So that is what a cognitive model of POCD looks like. Okay. And again, we can compare that, can't we, to what a paedophile, yeah, a paedophilic thought might look like, yeah, to a POCD thought, a paedophile OCD thought. And there's a big difference there, okay? Certainly around those themes of desire versus fear of desire, okay? OCD and POCD is an anxiety based disorder, yeah, in which people become so fearful of their intrusive thoughts, yeah, that basically they start to go into a battle with their internal world, which then impacts upon their external world in terms of the negative effect on functioning. Okay. People with POCD are not a risk to children. People with POCD are, kind of going so far out the way, so they are not a risk. Okay. And that's the important thing to remember when we're talking about POCD. Okay. So we can treat POCD. Yeah. So the first thing we do is we say, okay, well, you know what? There's two theories to what your problem is. Okay. One theory could be that you are a paedophile. Okay. That's one theory. Yeah. The other theory is that actually you've got OCD, a specific type of OCD, which latches onto your fears of being or becoming a paedophile. Okay. And if we can kind of establish those two things, we can then start to look at the evidence for and against each of these two categories. Okay, so there's going to be a certain type of evidence, a certain, the type of stuff that would stand up in a court of law that would be supportive of our theory A that this person's problem is that they are a paedophile. Okay? There's also going to be a lot of evidence that would suggest that actually this person's got this clinical problem called POCD. And typically the evidence around that is the fact that they are not happy with these thoughts. Yeah. In fact, they're reviled by the fact that they've had these intrusive thoughts. They avoid, yeah, and therefore are not a risk. They will kind of do everything they possibly can to get rid of this kind of these internal thoughts, and organize the reality really about minimizing risk to such a degree that they no longer have any real quality of life. Okay? So theory A, theory B, that's what that intervention is called, is just how we start to get a bit of leverage and legwork on what it is that we're actually doing with our OCD, okay? What it is that we're actually sorting here, okay? And then we start developing certain experiments, or we use exposure and response prevention as a way of kind of really building up our strength and our belief that actually our problem is OCD, not what our OCD is saying about us. And then, so what we will do is we will use certain interventions like we will create exposure scenarios. So we'll say, okay, your OCD says you're a risk. Yeah, your OCD says that actually, if you are left looking at children, or if you are left in the park or swimming pool, etc., that you know what, you're in danger of acting on it, you're in danger of liking it, and therefore, you know what, you need to avoid these situations at all costs. So what we would say is, okay, well, do you know what? That might be true. It might be accurate, okay? But what we need to do is we need to test it, because do you know what? It might not be. Okay? So we would go into a situation and we would kind of sit with the anxiety that comes up. We would go into a trigger situation and just test out what happens. Okay, so your OCD is saying this. Okay, let's just see what happens when we stay in a situation for a long period of time, and let's see what happens to your anxiety, and let's just see what happens overall. Okay? And what typically happens is, after somebody stays in a situation for a prolonged period of time, and when they test out some of these beliefs about what is going to happen, when they find out that A, their anxiety, their distress reduces over time without engaging in any of their compulsions, so without reassuring themselves, without checking for internal signs or anything like that, without using any of those strategies, after about 45 minutes, an hour and a half, something like that, their anxiety starts to go down and they learn something important about what it means to have these thoughts. They learn that actually, okay, I'm not a risk, yeah? And it challenges the belief there that their problem is their theory A rather than it being their theory B. Okay? So all the time they're finding out there that actually the theory B is the most realistic hypothesis and representation of what their problem is. Okay? And then we would just build it up. So we'd use other types of exposure or behavioral experiments there as a way of getting somebody to reinterpret their appraisal of what it means to have these intrusive thoughts. And as soon as they stop interpreting these thoughts as being a real, genuine threat, as soon as that kind of, that cognitive change has been made, they no longer interpret these thoughts as being a potential threat. Functioning increases, and they stop experiencing fear in response to them. And as a consequence, if we no longer fear these thoughts, our mind is looking out for less of them, looking out for them less. And so therefore we start to see a reduction in the frequency and intensity of these intrusive thoughts. Okay? So it's literally about breaking this kind of internal battle that people have. People are having a battle with their thoughts, and that is what generates that whole OCD kind of syndrome. Okay. Okay, so in this video, I've covered POCD and hopefully made a good case for why it is separate from actually being a paedophile, predator, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so POCD is a clinical issue. It is a subtype of obsessive compulsive disorder. It is all about the fear of desire rather than desire itself. And it is entirely treatable using cognitive behavioural therapy with exposure and response prevention. Okay, so I'm going to be doing more videos around obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm going to be getting them all out there. So if you found this video helpful and you are interested in looking at some of my other videos around obsessive compulsive disorder, then please subscribe, like, do all that usual YouTube stuff. You can go to my website at www.accesscbt.co.uk to find out more information about getting cognitive behavioural therapy for yourself. Otherwise, thank you very much for checking out this video, and I look forward to seeing you again on some of my future videos. Take it easy. Bye now.